Are you a beginner in wildlife photography and wondering why your photos just don't stand out, even though you have the right gear and you're doing everything right? Chances are you're making a few simple mistakes without even realizing it, and once you fix them, you'll be able to create photos that you're truly proud of. Welcome to Pixel Nomads. I'm Shantanu, and today we are talking about 3 mistakes that every beginner wildlife photographer makes, and more importantly, how to fix them. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to approach wildlife photography as a beginner and how to create amazing wildlife photos. Mistake number 1, ignoring composition. Wildlife photography, or any kind of photography for that matter, is all about storytelling, and composition is simply how you tell that story. And trust me, it's the easiest way to get better at photography. It's free. You don't need a new camera, you don't need to buy a new lens. All you need is creativity, time, and patience. So, what do we mean by composition? It is essentially just arranging the elements in your frame to tell a story. A well composed image does 2 things: it tells a story and it tells it clearly without having the viewer to work hard to decode it. Now, the sad bit is when we start out, composition often takes a backseat. We get so engrossed in learning our camera, its setting, the lenses, that we tend to ignore composition. And we end up with pictures which are technically perfect, well exposed, tack sharp, but they just don't stand out because we did not focus on the composition. Always remember, getting your settings right helps you take a photo. Getting the composition right helps you take a great one. The thing is, you could have the perfect settings and still end up with a bad photo. On the flip side, put your camera on full auto mode, just focus on the composition, you can still end up creating amazing images. And I also believe most of us are not bad at composition. It's just that we don't compose our shots. When I was a beginner, I fixated on my subjects. I used to zoom all the way in and take a shot. Until one day, I realized that all my photos are close-up portraits. And that's the day I realized I just don't compose my shots. So once you consciously realize that before taking any photo, you need to compose a shot, trust me, half the battle is won. And the good news is, composition is not some mysterious skill, and it's pretty easy to get better at. What personally helped me in the beginning was just starting small. You don't need to worry about the rules you keep hearing about: the rule of thirds, golden ratios, leading lines. Honestly, they can feel a little bit intimidating when you're new, and applying them in the field when you have a moving subject and the light conditions are changing, it's easier said than done. So how do we go about improving our composition? I'll give you 2 easy hacks. These help me a lot and I hope it can benefit you as well. So here's the first one, and it's the simplest. Just don't center your subject. Place your subject slightly off center. It instantly makes your photo feel more natural and balanced. Place it anywhere in the frame. Top, left, bottom, corners, you decide. It's your call. Look at this photo for instance. Here is how it looks when the subject is centered. And here is how it looks when the subject is moved slightly off center. Notice how the second version looks more natural, balanced, refined, and creative. Another thing that really helps is just shooting a bit wider. See, wildlife photography isn't just about the animal, it's also about the animal's world. So zoom out a little, include the surroundings, let the habitat be a critical part of your story. The mistake we make as beginners is that we are fixated on the subject and we tend to ignore everything around it. And always remember, nature is almost always beautiful. So when you're shooting wider, you're just letting nature compose the shot for you. Look at these 2 images for example. Same leopard, same moment, but there's a world of difference between these images. The zoomed in version is good, but it's not striking. The habitat shot though, it's breathtaking. The habitat around the leopard is so beautiful. And as a photographer, why won't you capture that? And that's what I mean by shooting wide. Include the habitat. It instantly improves your composition. So just don't center your subjects and shoot a bit wider. You will notice that your photos instantly feel more creative, balanced, and beautiful. These are some easy hacks to get you started, and trust me, they work. Composition is something which is very personal, and I'm sure over time you'll come up with your own signature style. Until then, just use these tips to create better photos. Mistake number 2, shooting in fully manual mode. This one's a pretty common mistake that beginners make. Somehow we end up believing that we need to shoot in fully manual mode because that's what the pros do. Well, that's the biggest misconception ever. Most pros don't shoot wildlife in full manual mode. They're usually in one of the semi-auto modes: aperture priority, shutter priority, or manual, but with auto ISO. Let me unpack that for you. Shooting in full manual requires you to adjust three settings at once to get the right exposure: shutter speed, aperture, and the ISO. Doing that in real time with constantly changing light and moving subjects is almost close to impossible. And doing that as a beginner, it's your worst nightmare. Auto modes exist for a reason. They are designed to lessen your burden so that you as a photographer can focus on the most important thing: the subject, the composition, and the story, and while the camera handles the balancing act. Using auto modes don't make you any less of a photographer. No one is going to look at your photo and ask you, hey, what mode was this shot on? All they care about mostly is whether the image moves them. So, what mode should you use? Let's unpack this a little bit. There are three settings that control the exposure of your shot: aperture, shutter speed, and the ISO. Out of these, shutter speed and aperture both physically control the amount of light entering your camera, and they also offer you creative controls. Aperture decides the depth of field, and shutter speed allows you to either freeze or blur motion. ISO, on the other hand, is just a brightness knob. You can crank it up to increase the exposure or crank it down to make the scene darker. ISO doesn't really control the amount of light entering your camera and does not offer you creative controls over the scene. So we'll just let the camera decide that. So to begin with, set your camera at auto ISO, and trust me, it'll make things super easy for you in the field. And if you're worried about noise that ISO creates, don't be. If you choose your shutter right, your aperture right, more often than not, you can always prevent ISO from skyrocketing. And if you can't, chances are you're shooting in really low light conditions and you need the high levels of ISO to actually get an image. Now with ISO set, there are really two modes that you need to choose from: shutter priority or aperture priority. If your goal is to freeze action, shoot flying birds or running animals, select shutter priority. You select the shutter speed and let the camera decide the aperture and the ISO required to get you a balanced exposure. Now, if you want to control how much of the scene should be in focus, use aperture priority. This mode works best for portraits or habitat shots where the animals are not moving much. You decide the aperture and let the camera handle rest of the settings. Aperture and shutter priority are great modes to start with. They give you the breathing space you need to really learn your camera settings inside out. But your long-term goal should be to move to manual but with auto ISO. You control both the shutter speed and the aperture and let the camera handle the ISO, the one thing we don't want to control. In my opinion, it's the most effective setup for wildlife photography, and personally, this is what I use. It works wonders. And trust me, starting with shutter priority and aperture priority is going to make the transition really easy for you. Mistake number 3, not practicing enough. Just like any other skill, you need to practice to get better at wildlife photography. Remember the old adage, practice makes perfect? Well, turns out it's true. Wildlife photography is complex. You're juggling a lot. Complicated gear, constantly changing lighting conditions, moving subjects, the pressure of composing a shot, and all of that at once. And the only way to handle that confidently is to practice beforehand. The mistake most beginners make is that they do not find creative ways to practice. You can't be in the wild every single day, but you should practice every single day. Well, not every single day, you can take breaks, of course, but the key is to practice as often as you can. Don't rely on the few trips to the wild you have planned in a year and assume that you will somehow execute perfectly when the time comes. That's not going to happen. And I get it. Not all of us have access to multiple jungle trips in a year or expensive safaris. But you don't need all of that to practice. Here's what you can do instead. Find urban wildlife close to your home. Birds are perfect for this. Look for a local lake, a local park, or even a patch of trees that has a healthy bird population. Trust me, birds are fidgety, they are unpredictable, and probably the best subjects to master wildlife photography on. And if you can't find wildlife, just shoot moving objects. Pet dogs, stray dogs, cattle, cars, anything that moves can become your subject. You will quickly understand shutter speeds, motion blur, freezing action, skills and concepts that are directly relevant to wildlife photography. And if you can't find moving subjects, just practice with still subjects. Practicing with still subjects or trying different genres of photography like street photography, landscape photography, they can teach you a lot about the basic concepts of photography. You can learn everything about composition, depth of field, focusing techniques, setting the right exposure, and you don't really need an animal to learn all of that. Alright, now that you know you have to practice, how do we build a regimen around it? Here's what I suggest. Take 4 photos every week, but make those photos intentional. Every photo that you take should have a good composition, the right exposure, and a reasonably sharp subject. Do it long enough and you'll become extremely comfortable with concepts of photography and your gear. All those buttons and dials on the back of your camera, they'll become second nature to you. Always remember, repetition builds instinct. So when that tiger finally walks out, you'll not fumble with your camera and you'll start shooting. So there you have it, the three biggest mistakes every beginner wildlife photographer makes. Avoiding these will instantly level up your wildlife photography game. I hope you found this video useful. If you did, hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to check out my photography work, this is my Instagram handle. That's it from me. I'll see you in the next one.